It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
Hey guys, how's it going? It's Wednesday, February 1st, and this is the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. We're on YouTube, so make sure to subscribe, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us here on Patreon. So what is happening on this wonderful Wednesday? We've got current news from around the world, the word study on the book of Acts, and of course, health is happiness. And today with Dr. Abe from Australia. All right, everyone, how are you doing? It is Wednesday, and I'm just super thankful for all of you guys joining us here and starting your day on the Morning Star Drive. Tonight is Wednesday service, and I really hope that all of you are looking forward to receiving some grace and fire. I just want to remind everyone to keep liking, keep commenting. I want to hear from you guys, see how you're doing, what's going on in your life. Write your questions, request testimonies. But I get the most important thing, the big thing that we're trying to achieve is to build a community over here on this platform. So whether you're on SoundCloud or YouTube, please leave a like the podcast, or like people's comments, or leave a comment yourself, or comment on other people's comments too, and that'd be something that I think will benefit everyone. Also, tomorrow is Question and Answer Thursday, so if you have any questions, go ahead, leave them in the DMs or whatnot. Already some questions coming in, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below, or DM me also, right? I would love to help you out as much as I can too, all right? Today is the day my parents leave, and by the time you listen to this, well, their flight leaves at 8 a.m., okay? So it's, by the time, a lot of you, by the time you listen to this, they're already gone, right? So we're talking 8 a.m. in Malaysia time, all right? So I'm so thankful to God for this entire time. 3 weeks, they were safe, enjoyed all their time in Southeast Asia. They loved Southeast Asia. They really did. Being by the ocean, going to the forest, a lot of nice places. It's really cheap. When you exchange the currency, it's super cheap. And they said they'd move over here, but they just don't know anyone. Like, they don't have any like close friends here, so they would stay in Canada. But now there's, like, for myself, the only thing I'm gonna do now is I gotta rest. I am so spent. It's like, it's not like I was expending a ton of energy. It was really relaxing for me too. But when you're the person who's in charge of it, and you're the one making the schedule, and you're kind of worried about things happening. What about the weather? Should we go here? Should we go there? You kind of plan out the different things that we can do each and every day. And, it was 4 different countries, and 3 of them I've never been to. So it was, I didn't realize it until now how stressful it really was, right? Even being in such like paradise type places, but it takes its toll, and you can tell by my voice, like that's my nose. Like, I am stuffed right now, and I have what you call like headaches from congestion, and it doesn't come up all the time, but every once in a while it's just there. I gotta blow my nose like 20 times a day, and on top of this, guys, not to brag. But I was doing all the podcasts during this vacation time. So on top of it, I had my stresses of making this podcast every day. But I am super thankful for all of you guys out there supporting even during that time, knowing that I was on vacation. But, for me, being with my parents, really awesome to be with them. And you know what? There's something I thought about that was really, really interesting, okay? Now, when I was younger, and you guys, those of you who are older, those of you guys who are young might understand me right now. I was like so annoyed by my parents, like to be with them for a long time. Like, I get annoyed because my dad is one of those guys who has to comment about everything. And then, he just puts his hands in everything. And, he tries to be funny, but he's a dad. So he's got these really, really bad dad jokes. And it's just really like, when I was younger, right? And now, even my dad, like, we're in different countries. My dad's in the taxi, and he's just trying to read every single sign because it's in a different language, right? So I'm just like, when I was younger, I'm like, what is so annoying, right? But the interesting thing is, it doesn't really bother me now. Like, it just kind of goes past my brain. I'm just kind of just enjoying the moment and stuff like that. Like, even like my mom says some crazy stuff. Like, she's always gonna be a mom, right? Like, in the mornings almost every day, like during lunchtime or something like that, she'll look at me and she's like, hey, did you poo yet? I'm like, what? Like in my head, I'm like, what? And when I turn to look at her, she's serious. So I look at her, I bust out laughing so many times. She's like, did you poo? I'm like, I don't, like, I have two thoughts in my head. Number one is I'm like, I'm not a child. But then secondly, this is what they do. So it's kind of like when you're like super old, you have this routine. Like, I guess you poop in the morning, whatever it is, right? But I'm just like, it's just too funny for me. So, they like my mom and my dad, they're awesome. And now that I'm much older, I'm much more mature, I can actually enjoy it more. I can enjoy it. I can look at the situation and just laugh, right? So it's a really fun dynamic, like being with them. And when I see my parents, I definitely take after my mom, like way more. Like she's the fun, go lucky, happy, always out. My dad tries to be the one in charge and stuff, but my mom's the one that holds the credit card. She's the one that agrees or disagrees to go somewhere. Yeah, so it's kind of funny, but yeah, it was a great trip, and now that they're gone, yeah, I think I'm gonna just get some rest. Of course, I'm gonna do my podcast, but I need to get some rest, or else, I'm not gonna recover from this sickness. Well, I don't even know if it's a real, like, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just my body's exhausted, because I don't have like coughing or like, like your body's weak. Mine is just all in it's all my nasal congestion. That's all it is. I'm congested. I get headaches from the congestion, and that's about it. So, I'm hoping that this will pass pretty soon. Well, it's quite interesting because I'm with my parents all the time, and we're always out and eating out and stuff. Like, in these 20 days I'm with them, it was actually about 20 days, right? I went to like 24 cafes in those 20 days. It's pretty crazy. Yeah. And I could only do that because I was with them. But either way, very grateful and thankful for being able to, that God gave me the opportunity to do this, not only just live with them for 10 months, but also go on vacation with them and just help them to enjoy their life in their 70s as much as they can. All right, so let's get into this week's music from some member artists from around the world. Yesterday was the last day of GGG, so we played like a bunch of GGG songs for this. But we're going to get back into our normal schedule. It's February 1st. Yes, it's the first day of February. January is officially in the books. So I'm going to start off with a really good song I like, one of my favorites. It's Somebody Boys from America with Alone I Pray. And this is a great song that all of us have to take to heart. This is our time to pray right now. Then we have J Root from the Paper Music Associates in Korea. This song is Latte featuring Saint Green. And I chose this song because I probably ate about 30 lattes during this entire time. And last but not least, from our new Japanese artist, Tecmo Plus, we're going to listen to the song Diamond.
Please don't let me down, Lord. I know I can trust you with all my heart. So I'm on my knees praying for you to always come through. Even if I pray all night, all I want is for your will be done. So I'm on my knees praying for you to always come through. No, I'm not slipping through. No, I'm not falling down. The only thing that's falling is my knees on the floor. I'm praying, Lord, will you give me strength? Lord, will you give me power? I can't do this myself, so bless me in the morning hours. All the demons test me, but they will never shake me. If I pray, they hate me. If I pray, you love me. Connected with you is the only thing that matters. And honestly, I couldn't be happier. While I'm praying on my knees, I trust you with all my heart. For you always come through. For myself, for my family, for myself alone I pray. Please don't let me down, Lord. I know I can trust you with all my heart. So I'm on my knees praying for you to always come through. Even if I pray all night, I'm on my knees, praying for you to always come through.
I pray to never just settle for good when great is available. Who's the mastermind behind this mind? I give all the credit to God, that's why I'm back. They mad that I made it, I know that the Satans, they hate it. I keep working hard just to make progress. Now I'm on 10, trust the process, ayy. Look at my efforts lately, I'm setting conditions daily. I'm praying on my knees, so bless me. Please bless me, please bless me. Tribulations always come and go, I will never stop, just always know your focus determines reality, stay solid, that's why I'm praying on my knees. I trust you with all my heart, for you to always come through. For myself, for my family, on myself alone I pray.
Please don't let me down, Lord. I know I can trust you with all my heart, so I'm on my knees, praying for you to always come through. Even if I pray all night, all I want is for your will be done. So I'm on my knees, praying for you to always come through.
SB.
한 잔의 라떼 Cause I need a cafe 오늘은 밤이 올 수 없게 오늘은 잠이 들 수 없네 Stay awake 한 잔의 라떼 oh yeah. Cause I need a cafe 오늘은 밤이 올 수 없게 그럴 수밖에 오늘은 잠이 들 수 없네 Stay awake 깨어 있어야 해 필요한 건 각성 상태 피로감은 누적이 돼 내일을 죽기는 주적이 돼 벌써 몇 시간째야 만큼한 것 같아 아니 나 오늘 막차 아니 저 차를 Sweet little bit Sweet little bit Sweet little bit 쓴 거 싫으니까 쓴 거 싫으니까 Give me a minute babe Me a minute give me a minute babe 짙은 밤 하늘에 Milky Way 한 잔의 라떼 cafe 오늘은 밤이 올 수 없게 그럴 수밖에 오늘은 잠이 들 수 없네 Stay awake 잠깐만 날 좀 있게 해줘 어제가 날 붙잡지 않게 해줘 Let me go now 그럴 수밖에 잠에 들 수 없네 A couple latte Stay awake Sipping 한 모금이 전에 나와 지금은 조금은 달라 Sleeping to it softly 기분 좋은 작은 다른 건 신경 쓰지 않아 Flipping City 거스린 tomorrow sarcasm 가라른 미리 부드러운 느낌이 쓰라림에 지친 나는 외로워해주네 Can you feel me now You feel me now You feel me now 그 룸 위로 나 지기까지 갈 수 있게 될 것 같죠 저기 Be there till break of dawn 나 때는 말야 wow. 입내지만 너 화면이 쌓여 침묵은 닮은 새고 밤을 새봐도 쌓이는 problem 빙빙 도는 내 몸 뻥 뚫린 내 홈 몇 번을 해 너 봐야 했어 다짐에 이게 마지막 no 한 잔의 라떼 oh yeah. Cause I need a cafe 오늘은 밤이 올 수 없게 그럴 수밖에 오늘은 잠이 들 수 없네 Stay awake 잠깐만 날 좀 있게 해줘 어제가 날 붙잡지 않게 해줘 Let me go now 그럴 수밖에 잠에 들 수 없네 A couple latte Stay awake Stay awake
Take, go there for a moment. Change from me.
I like you for stand up again. There is nothing to be afraid of. It's shining. It's like a Cupid valued. It's a shining diamond driving. Life is beautiful. Ooh. 君だけしかない輝く光を All is in the sky. Don't think of fear. Change. Go there for a moment. Change for me. Please, someone tell me how to change for me. There is always right behind the clouds. Nothing's wasted so far love again. Because never ending forever. Keep shining. It's like a Cupid valued. It's a shining diamond driving. Life is beautiful. Ooh. 君の中にある未来の光を unleash in the sky. Don't think of fear. It's like a Cupid valued. It's a shining diamond driving. Life is beautiful. Ooh. 君だけしかない輝く光を unleash in the sky. Don't think of fear.
And that was a Tecmo Plus with Diamond. Before that, Latte from J Root featuring Paper Music. J Root from PMA in Korea, and that's featuring St. Green. And of course, that first song, feature artist of the day, that is Some New Boys from America with Alone I Pray. All right, so let's get into some news going on around the world. And of course, as brides of this history, we do have the responsibility to pray for this world, but in order to pray for it, we need to know what is going on. So this is really important that we start to see the world news even more than we did in the past. So let's go back to Pakistan. We had some news yesterday of 2 accidents and more than 50 people dying. Today, Pakistan mosque blast and police targeted in suicide attack that kills 59 people. So at least 59 people have been killed by a suicide bombing that apparently targeted policemen praying in a mosque in Peshawar, Pakistan. The mosque is within the tightly guarded police headquarters area. Basically, they're saying the prime minister said terrorists want to create fear by targeting those who perform the duty of defending Pakistan. The Pakistani Taliban denied involvement after an initial claim by one of its commanders. The group ended a ceasefire in November, and violence has been on the rise since. In December, it targeted a police station like Peshawar in the northwest of the country, leading to the deaths of 33 militants. A hospital spokesperson said, told the BBC the death toll stood at 59, while 157 people had been injured. Between 300 and 400 police officers were in the area at the time, Peshawar Police Chief Mohammed Ijaz Khan told local media. And the mosque is actually one of the most heavily controlled areas of the city, which includes police headquarters and intelligence and counterterrorism bureaus. Now, Mr. Sharif said those behind the attack had nothing to do with Islam, and he said the entire nation is standing united against the menace of terrorism. The blast took place around 1:30 p.m. local time during afternoon prayers in the northwestern city near the country's border with Afghanistan. A video circulating on social media and verified by the BBC shows that half of a wall caved in. Also, the mosque was covered in bricks and debris as people clambered over the rubble to escape. And hours after the blast, the news... They witnessed a facility full of the injured, many still wearing their police uniforms. Some were covered in burn cream, their skin red with burns from the explosion. Others have broken bones from being hit by falling rubble. The attack on the mosque took place at the start of a key week for Pakistani diplomacy. And on Monday, the president of the UAE was due to visit Islamabad, although the trip was canceled at the last minute because of bad weather. And on Tuesday, an IMF delegation is meant to visit Pakistan as part of the process to unlock a bailout loan to prevent the country from defaulting. So Prayers go out. And as we see, there's a lot of stuff going on around the world, and we really need to pray for the world as much as we can. Over there in China, in Sichuan, couples in Chinese province allowed to have unlimited children. Now, this might sound kind of weird, but China used to be a place where they limited the amount of children you're able to have, right? Like, you go to most democratic countries, you can have as many children as you want. But couples in China's Sichuan province will be allowed to have as many children as they want as the country continues to try and get a grip on its declining population. Last year, the population in China fell for the first time in 60 years, and for decades, the country had a one-child policy increased nationally for married couples to 3 in 2021. And as part of the policy change in Sichuan, unmarried individuals will also now be able to raise children. And in 2016, China scrapped its controversial one-child policy, which was introduced in 1979. So how long was that? That's 16 years plus 21 years. That's 37 years. One-child policies. And families that broke the rules during that time, they would be fined and in some cases even lost their jobs. So in a culture that historically favors boys over girls, the policy also led to forced abortions, because if they had a girl, they would abort and wait for a guy, because you only had one shot to have one child. But the changes that began in 2016 failed to halt that decline in the birth rate, and deaths outnumbered births for the first time last year in China. And now there will be no limit on the number of children people can have in Sichuan, a province of 80 million people in the southwest of the country. Chinese President Xi Jinping has made boosting birth rates a priority. The government has offered tax breaks and better maternal health care to reverse or slow the falling rates. And it comes as China is still battling COVID-related deaths throughout the country. The virus tore through towns and cities after the lifting of zero COVID restrictions in December, and neighboring countries, including Japan, are also facing falling birth rates. Japan's prime minister says as a result, his country is on the brink of not being able to function as a society. So if you want to know how bad China's birth rate falls, and this births estimated per 1,000 population, they are below the UK, the US, India, Nigeria. In 2016, the two-child policy replaced the one-child policy in China, and even then, it keeps dropping lower and lower, and now it's below India, US, UK, Nigeria too. So that's not good signs. It's not good news. You need to replace the population so people can actually take the jobs, right, to do it. So it's going to be quite hectic, and this is what happens when you try to control too much, right? So they could try to control how many babies people could have, and now that the whole country has their thoughts have gone a certain way, trying to change it back is going to be very, very difficult. Last but not least, we'll go into Russia and Ukraine, as both the U.S. and Germany rule out sending F-16 fighter jets to the Ukraine, despite renewed calls from Ukrainian officials for air support. And asked by a reporter on Monday if the U.S. would be providing the planes, Biden replied simply no. His comment comes a day after Germany's leader also ruled out sending fighter jets. Ukraine has said it needs the jets to take control of its airspace in its ongoing war with Russia. F-16 fighting Falcons are widely considered one of the world's most reliable fighter jets and are used by other countries such as Belgium and Pakistan. And they would be a significant upgrade on the Soviet-era fighting jets Ukraine is currently using, which were made before the country declared independence from the USSR more than 30 years ago. However, Biden has repeatedly rebuffed Ukraine's pleas for the jets, instead focusing on providing military support in other areas. The U.S. announced last week that it would supply Kyiv with 31 Abrams tanks, with the UK and Germany also pledging similar support. UK's Deputy Foreign Minister Andriy Melnik welcomed that announcement, but asked allies for the creation of a fighter jet coalition that would also provide Ukraine with Eurofighters, Tornadoes, French Rafales, and Swedish Gripen jets. In an interview on Sunday, Germany's chancellor said it seemed frivolous to discuss sending other military aid to Ukraine when they had just committed to send the Leopard 2s. Olaf Scholz also reiterated to the German newspaper that the NATO military alliance was not at war with Russia and that it would not allow such an escalation. Moscow has accused NATO of being an aggressor by proxy, and members of the alliance, including the US and Germany, have been reluctant to send military aid that could see the conflict escalate. Even the French President Macron on Monday echoed the sentiment, saying that while nothing is excluded, When it comes to providing support to Ukraine, it must neither further inflame the situation nor limit France's ability to defend itself. Other EU countries, including the Netherlands, have not yet given a definitive response on whether they will send fighter jets. However, Poland has indicated that it would be prepared to supply fighter jets in coordination with NATO. So that is the top 3 news going on around the world. I hope it's something that you guys like. This is something so important for us, as we have to pray for the world and repent for the world too, but we need to know what is going on. So, leave a comment if this actually helps you guys out when it comes to praying for the world, all right? That moves us into some sporting news. We'll start off with some soccer as Chelsea from the EPL inching closer to a deal with Benfica's Fernandez. Ziyech headed to PSG, sources say. So negotiations between Chelsea and Benfica for the transfer of Argentina international Enzo Fernandez intensified on Monday and will continue to deadline day. Sources added that Chelsea are nearly ready to offer the release clause of €120 million for the 2022 World Cup winner after tabling an offer on Monday around $100 million plus bonuses. In FA Cup news, West Ham defeats Derby 2-0, which means as they ease into the FA Cup 5th round with a comfortable 2-0 victory to Derby County, they set up a meeting with Manchester United. Also, one of the surprise teams of the FA Cup is Wrexham, owned by Hollywood star Ryan Reynolds from Canada. They could face Tottenham in the 5th round. It was a crazy game. Okay, against, I believe they were playing against Sheffield United. So the non-league club Wrexham, right? They're like not even Premiership. They're like not the Premier League, not Championship League. They're even before, like 2 leagues below that. This non-league club were moments away from producing another shock win in the FA Cup, but conceded a late goal to draw 3-3 against Sheffield United. But it's amazing. So their 5th round is going to... They're going to be playing most likely Tottenham, which is going to be quite crazy for a team that's non-league. We're going to see this team get better and better as they go. In second news, NFL. In NFL news, 49ers quarterback, third-string quarterback Brock Purdy has torn his UCL in his right elbow. So an offseason that already figured to have plenty of quarterback-centric questions for the 49ers now has even more. In the first quarter of Sunday's NFC Championship game, Niners rookie quarterback Brock Purdy suffered a torn ulnar collateral ligament in his right elbow that will keep him out for 6 months. Now, based on that timeline, Purdy could return around the start of training camp or perhaps a couple weeks into it. Aaron Rodgers. It looks like the Green Bay Packers are ready to move on from him. Right? And a scenario that once seemed unthinkable, Aaron Rodgers' trade could be driven by financial reasons, the state of the Packers franchise, and ultimately the feelings of the team and the star quarterback. So just watch out for the offseason in the NFL. You can have a lot of movement of quarterbacks. Of course, Tom Brady, too, is looking for a new team also. The NFL team salary cap will be at $224.8 million, sources say. So this is an increase of $16.6 million from the 2022 salary cap, which is only at $208.2 million. So the Chicago Bears are projected to have the most salary cap space with more than $91 million, while the Saints will have $58 million. Last but not least, we'll go to the NHL. I haven't talked about them in a long time, but finally some news from the Vancouver Canucks as they trade away their captain, who's having an amazing season. Bo Horvat, leaving the Vancouver Canucks. On Monday, the Canucks trading their captain to the New York Islanders, and Horvat heads to Long Island in exchange for forward Anthony Beauvillier, a prospect forward Aatu Ratti, and conditional first-round pick in this year's draft, the teams announced. And the decision to move on from Horvat was expected, given he was a pending unrestricted free agent who had yet to find common ground with the Canucks on a new deal. And he's, at this rate, he should be getting around $8 million a year. But, the Canucks are not willing to pay that much. Last but not least, sad news. Hall of Famer Bobby Hull, the Golden Jet, dies at age 84. 12-time All-Star, 2-time Hart Trophy, which is the MVP of the league. The Chicago Blackhawks announced Monday he was 84 years old. He was known as a Golden Jet because of his blonde hair and his speed on the ice, and became beloved in Chicago for teaming with Stan Mikita to help the Blackhawks win the Stanley Cup in 1961, ending a 23-year title drought. So prayers go out to the entire family. His son, Brett Hull, also was an amazing hockey player, too. One of the best goal scorers ever, too. Either way. So there it is, guys. That's top 3 news in sports, and also top 3 news around the world to help you guys with your prayer topics. But now that the time of news is done, you know what that means. It is the golden time. yes, it is the golden time, a time of praise and worship to the Holy Trinity. Hope all of you guys are looking forward to giving glory to God and the Holy Spirit. So, what are we going to praise and worship today? We're going to start off with Never Changing Heart for the Lord, and then Fire, It's Fire, and we'll break things down with Whenever, Wherever. So as one body of the Morning Star Drive, let's spend this time giving praise, honor, and glory to the Holy Trinity.
Fire, fire, fire. Boldly shout it aloud. Fire, fire, fire. Shout it cool and proud.
The time's come, we were waiting.
Waiting
The Savior's light is shining on us.
on us.
We're a witness to the word. We're a witness to the Lord. We will preach about this time.
Let's run together to the next level.
We are the only one.
There is only one true history, God's word of truth.
We are the only one.
Our voice is only growing louder.
It's the best history. We're burning with the Holy Spirit's fire. We know the power of truth. Shout it out. Now we turn the world upside down.
We are on fire.
What is fire?
We are on fire. With the new word of the times, cover the whole world. All the deceit and lies will be destroyed, burned. The Lord has come to bring fire on earth, that He's wishing at it. We're already kindled. This bringing history, the complete history. What we need right now is to preach this history. The word of fire, spirit of fire. Love is on fire, with a fire, fire, fire. Fire, fire, fire. Boldly shout it aloud. Fire, fire, fire. Shout it cool and proud.
We are the only one.
There is only one true history, God's word of truth.
We are the only one.
Our voice is only growing louder.
It's the best history. We're burning with the Holy Spirit's fire. We know the power of truth. Shout it out.
Fiery Holy Spirit, fiery testify.
We're burning with the Holy Spirit's fire. We know the power of truth. Shout it out. Now we turn the world back now.
We are on fire.
What is fire?
Hot, hot, hot.
Spirit fire.
We are on fire. Hot, hot, hot.
Preach with fire. Fire, fire, fire. Word is fire.
Hot, hot, hot.
Spirit fire.
We are on fire. Hot, hot, hot.
Preach with fire. Fire, fire, fire.
Whenever or wherever I may be, it's only the Lord that I see. Whether I close or open my eyes, I can't seem to get Him off my mind. Oh, come to me, I heard Him call. The Lord so great pleaded with me so small. And suddenly He stood by my side. With the Lord here by my side, worries of the world are gone. Thoughts of you, my Lord, rush into my mind. Whenever and wherever, it's only you I think about great pleaded with me so small, and suddenly he stood by my side. With the Lord here by my side, worries of the world are gone. Thoughts of you, my Lord, rush into my mind. Whenever and wherever, it's only you I think about. When I close my eyes or open my eyes, you're the only one on my mind. Can't seem to get you off my mind. Thoughts of you, my Lord, rush into my mind. Whenever and wherever, it's only you I think about. When I close my eyes or open my eyes, you're the only one on my mind. Can't seem to get you off my mind. Thoughts of you, my Lord, rush into my mind. Whenever and wherever, it's only you I think about. When I close my eyes or open my eyes, you're the only one on my mind. Can't seem to get you off my mind. Thoughts of you, my Lord, rush into my mind. Whenever and wherever, it's only you I think about. When I close my eyes or open my eyes, you're the only one on my mind. Can't seem to get you off my mind.
And that was Whenever, Wherever. Before that, Fire, It's Fire, and of course, Never Changing Heart for the Lord. All right, so let's get into today's word study for today. And of course, every single Wednesday, we go over the scriptures and we go over the books, origins, backgrounds, so that we have a better idea of when we read these books, how important they are, what's the context of them too. So today we're going to get to the book of Acts, as this week's message is Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. And we're going to go into the background and the origins, maybe not so much in the political situation, but the author, the dating and stuff like that too, so you'll have a better idea. So let's get into it. We're going to touch on three big, important aspects of the background of Acts. So we're gonna examine the authorship of the book, and then the historical setting, and well, maybe just do those two, because those two are very, very important. I was thinking also doing some more of a theological background of it, but it's such a large book that we'd have to focus only on a certain part, right? So let's first look at the authorship of the book of Acts. And of course, we're going to say, when you talk to anyone, it's inspired, it's God-breathed, inspired by the Holy Spirit. But there are human authors, right? And the human authors is something that's very important for us to understand, because if you know the author, you'll have a better idea why they're writing certain things, okay? So traditionally, Acts has been attributed to Luke, right? The author of the third gospel, but neither the third gospel nor the book of Acts specifically mentions the name of the author. So we need to look at the reasons for affirming the traditional view of Luke's authorship, okay? So we'll take a look at several different parts to show that Luke is the author, even though it never says it, okay? So first we're going to compare Acts with the Gospel of Luke, right? Second, we'll examine early church history and its witness concerning Luke's authorship, and then we'll briefly look at other aspects of the New Testament that indicate that Luke wrote these books, okay? So let's take a look at it by comparing it to the Gospel of Luke, right? That's the first way we're going to find that it's from Luke. So when you compare the book of Acts with the third Gospel, the book of Luke, two types of evidence emerge that strongly suggest one person wrote both books. And on the one hand, there is explicit information stated directly in both books that points in this direction. On the other hand, there's also implicit evidence from the style and content of these books. So implicitly, explicitly, the comparisons and the connections between the book of Acts and Luke are very, very similar too. So that's one of the biggest reasons why they say it's written by the same author. Now, when you look at early church evidence, if you look at early church history, so from the 2nd to the 4th century, the early church testified that Luke, the traveling companion of Paul, was the author of both Acts and the Gospel of Luke. Right? So, like, for instance, manuscripts, very, very old manuscripts, like, there's one called Papyrus 75, discovered in 1952 in Egypt. It was written on papyrus, obviously, and it includes some of our earliest New Testament manuscript evidence. And it was probably copied sometime between, let's say, AD 175 and 200, and it includes large portions of the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of John. And between the two texts of the two Gospels are written, there are two descriptions of their content. And after the conclusion of the Gospel of Luke, the manuscript contains the words, the Gospel according to Luke. And immediately following these words is the expression, the Gospel according to John. So these notices indicate that the material preceding the words, the Gospel according to Luke, was identified as Luke's Gospel. And this manuscript evidence indicates that from that very early on, it was believed that Luke wrote the third Gospel. And by extension, it points to Luke as the author of Acts as well. And also, like, if you look at, there's another manuscript called the Muratorian Fragment, and that's dated around AD 170 to 180. And it's the earliest known document listing the New Testament books that the early church considered to be canonical. And after affirming Luke's authorship of the Gospel of Luke, it explicitly points to him as the author of Acts as well. So those are kind of like what you would call the early church evidence. And then you have early church leaders, right? Like the church father Irenaeus, who lived from around AD 130 to 202, believed that Luke was the author of the third Gospel. He says it in his book Against Heresies, and he referred to Acts as the book that recorded the Gospel preached by Paul. His words are important because good historical evidence indicates that Irenaeus had access to firsthand knowledge regarding Luke's authorship of Acts. And Clement of Alexandria, another early church leader, lived from around AD 150 to 215, also referred to Luke as the author of Acts in his book called Stromata. And he basically says that, yeah, it's Luke that wrote this too. So there's other evidence there. And that's why there's good reason to affirm common authorship for Acts and the third Gospel, the Gospel of Luke, that the early church testified that this single author was Luke. So so that makes sense. So that's why the author we say is from Luke. Now, those of you guys who don't know who Luke is, a couple things you need to know. Number one, he was not an apostle. He was not one of the 12. He appears to have been well educated, and he was Paul's traveling companion. So how do these details compare to what we know about Luke? Well, first of all, Luke was not an apostle. We know that. The apostles served in a foundational role for the church, exercising unique authority on Christ's behalf to establish the church and guard it from error and trouble. And according to Acts chapter 1, verse 21-22, apostles had to be trained by Jesus himself. But Luke never met Jesus in person and never claimed the type of authority that belonged to the apostles. Rather, he was simply a faithful supporting member of Paul's missionary endeavors, and he was a servant of an apostle, or as Paul described him described him in Philemon, verse 24, a fellow laborer of an apostle. And second, it's likely that Luke was well educated, and we can infer this from Colossians chapter 4, verse 14, where Paul identified Luke as a physician. So while medicine was not as formal a discipline in the days of the New Testament as it is today, it still required a person with skill and aptitude. Third, Luke was Paul's traveling companion, and the Apostle Paul mentioned that Luke's traveled with him in the book of Colossians, 2 Timothy, Philemon, all say that Luke traveled with him. And we can sum up the issue of authorship for Acts in this way, that there's a great deal of historical evidence that point to Luke's authorship of Acts. Luke and Acts have a common author, and the evidence of the early church consistently attributes authorship to Luke, and the biblical data is consistent with this idea. And in light of these evidences, we have good reason to believe that Luke was the author of both the third Gospel and Acts, and we should always remember that Luke had excellent access and proximity to the subject matter he described. If he's always with Paul, he probably met Peter and all the other apostles too, so he had a lot of access to information too. So the historical setting of the book of Acts is very interesting. So now that we got the authorship down, let's take a look at the historical setting of Acts, right? So first, let's take a look at the dating. There's many different opinions on when the book of Acts was first written, and in general terms, we can divide the opinions of New Testament scholars into two basic orientations. On the one hand, some have argued that Luke wrote after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple in AD 70, and on the other hand, others have argued that he wrote before the destruction, right? So it's either before AD 70 or after. So the tragic events of AD 70 were critical to Jewish history, and for this reason, it's helpful to think of opinions on these matters in terms of these events. And we'll look at each of these outlooks, beginning, there's a lot of different ways. Is it before or after? But those are the two, not far after, not far before, but those are the two consensuses that we have right now at the moment. Who is the original audience? So with this understanding of the early date of Acts in mind, we should turn to a second feature of the historical setting of Acts, the original audience of Luke's work. So an awareness of the audience Luke sought to reach with the book of Acts is critical to understanding his work. So we're going to explore the original audience of Acts in two ways. First, we'll look at the book's explicit dedication to Theophilus. And second, we'll look at the possibility that the book was also intended for a broader audience. So let's begin with Theophilus, okay? So this is supposed to be Luke's first reader. So Luke's prologue implies that Theophilus was his patron, the one who commissioned his writing. And as we have seen in Luke chapter 1, verse 3 and Acts chapter 1, verse 1, Luke dedicated his works to Theophilus. And beyond this, in Luke chapter 1, verse 3, Luke called Theophilus most excellent Theophilus. And Luke used the term most excellent as an expression of honor. So this terminology has led many to believe that Theophilus was his wealthy patron. But the relationship between Luke and Theophilus was more complex than mere patronage, and by reading the book of Luke and Acts, Theophilus became Luke's student. So we can see this aspect of Theophilus' relationship to Luke in the prologue to Luke's gospel. So in Luke chapter 1, verse 34, it says, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, it seemed good also to me to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. All right? So as this passage indicates, Luke's book was designed in part so that Theophilus would know the certainty of the things he had been taught. Or to put it simply, Luke wrote to instruct Theophilus. So having seen that Luke explicitly cited Theophilus as his first reader, it's also helpful to think of Luke's original audience in broader terms, right? So now that we know that the original audience was Theophilus, but let's take a look at the broader audience, right? So from what we read elsewhere in the New Testament, it's not difficult to see that the broader church in the first century struggled with a number of issues that Luke addressed in the book of Acts. So Luke's history mentioned strife between Jewish and Gentile believers and divisions based on the leadership of different apostles and teachers. So his record touches on doctrinal errors introduced by false teachers. Acts also addresses strife between the church and civil governments, and it focuses on issues faced by women and the poor, and it records persecution, sufferings, and imprisonments. Now, Acts touches on these kinds of doctrinal, moral, and practical difficulties because the broader church struggled with these kinds of issues in its early decades. So since Luke wrote the book of Acts to address a very broad set of issues, it seems reasonable to assume that he intended his work to be read by many different believers, and he was concerned to help both Theophilus and the early church at large deal with the many challenges they faced. So let's take a look at the social context. So having considered the date and original audience of the book of Acts, we're ready to address a third concern, that the general social context of Luke's work, the kind of world in which the book of Acts was written, the more we can understand about the social forces at work in Luke's day. So the better equipped we will be to grasp many features and understanding this book a lot better. We'll explore the social context of Acts by looking at two central features of life in the first century church. So let's take a look at the Roman Empire first. So by the time Luke wrote the book of Acts, the Roman Empire had conquered and controlled the entire Mediterranean world and had extended its reach as far as present-day Britain, North Africa, and parts of Asia in the days of the early church. So the empire was still growing, adding more and more peoples and territories to its domain. As it did so, the Roman Empire deeply influenced all aspects of society with its distinctly Roman values, goals, and beliefs. So without a doubt, the greatest influences of Rome had the influences Rome had on conquered territories were political and economic. So one of the chief political concerns of that Roman Empire was to ensure peace and loyalty within the empire by exerting forceful control over local authorities. So conquered nations were allowed a measure of local autonomy, but their local governments were often reconfigured and were always in subjection to the Roman hierarchy. So let me give you an example. The book of Acts mentions two Roman governors of Caesarea. It was Felix and Festus, right? And they ruled the entire land of Judea from Caesarea. So in addition to overseeing taxation, they were responsible for maintaining peace and order in their part of the Roman Empire. So the empire also exercised cultural and political influence through the integration of Roman citizens into the population of conquered nations. So often, Rome offered retiring military forces land in newly conquered territories, and this practice established enclaves of loyal Roman citizens all across the entire empire and promoted the values of commitments of Rome in both official and social settings. And this is why the book of Acts mentions people from Rome from time to time as early as Pentecost. So if you read in Acts chapter 2, there were visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism. And again, of course, you'll see Cornelius, the God-fearing Roman centurion in Acts chapter 10, plays an important role in the spread of the gospel in Acts. So beyond this, local cultures were influenced by Rome's public works, such as roads, elaborate buildings, public meeting places. And this aspect of Roman rule explains how Paul and others traveled so freely and safely in their missionary efforts. The apostles also used these public venues to proclaim the gospel as they traveled from place to place. So perhaps the most important feature of the Roman Empire for the early church was its influence on the religions of the people it conquered. So at the time of Luke's writing, one man stood at the center of the entire Roman Empire. It was Caesar. And the emperor or Caesar was not only seen as the lord of his people and realm, but also as the savior of the people. So according to Roman propaganda, Caesars delivered their peoples from chaos and darkness. And the extension of the Roman Empire was presented as an extension of his salvation. So freeing people from the tyranny of their local kings and bringing everyone under Rome's benevolent rule. So in most places, conquered people were allowed to continue many of their own religious practices, but they were required to confess the superiority of the Caesar, right? And the traditional Roman gods. So now in many respects, most Jews and Christians in the first century were respectable subjects of Rome, but faithful Jews and Christians refused to acknowledge the supremacy of Roman religion. So the Roman Empire designated the Jewish faith as a religio licita, or legal religion, and it tolerated the Christian faith as much as possible, even though it still repressed both groups. So through its control of government, population, public works, and religion, Rome attempted to spread its influence everywhere it could. So now that we have a look, now that we've looked at the social context of Acts in terms of the influences of the Roman Empire, let's get more into another crucial dimension of the social situation in which Luke wrote, which is the relationship between unbelieving Jews and the early Christian church. So let's first take a look at the Jews, right? The relationship between the Jews and the early church, first, by noting the deep connection between them, and second, by exploring their fundamental differences. All right, so let's take a look at the connection between Jews and the early Christian church. The early church shared a common heritage with the Jewish people. So as obvious as it is, in the modern world, we often have to remind ourselves of the fact that Jesus was a Jew. The apostles were Jews. And at first, the church itself consisted almost entirely of Jewish converts. So it should not be surprising, right, that in the mind of the early church, loyalty to the promised Jewish Messiah implied a certain faithfulness to Judaism. And according to the book of Acts, many people in the early church attended temple worship, met in synagogues to hear the scriptures, and maintained appreciation for many Jewish customs. For example, in Acts chapter 13, Paul says, "We tell you the good news, what God promised our fathers, he has fulfilled for us, their children, by raising up Jesus," right? So Paul and those who traveled with him identified themselves with the Jews in the synagogue, speaking of the patriarchs as our fathers and of Christians as us, their children. So in addition, the early church and the Jewish communities at large were both committed to the same scriptures. In the book of Acts, Christians consistently appealed to the scriptures when they proclaimed the gospel in Jewish context, right? They used the same book. And in Acts chapter 17 records how Paul turned to the scriptures when proclaiming Christ to Jews. right? So beyond this, the deep connection between Christianity and Judaism resulted in significant interactions between the Jewish authorities and the early Christian church. Now, according to the book of Acts, the early church's boldness in proclaiming the gospel of Christ often led to conflict with Jewish authorities, but as much as possible, the early Christians acknowledged Jewish leaders and resisted them only when they ordered them to disobey the commands of God. Okay? So, that is the deep connection between the early Christian church and Judaism. However, there were still distinguished fundamental differences. And of course, most fundamentally, Christians and unbelieving Jews disagreed over the person and work of who Jesus was, right? So the church proclaimed that Jesus was the Messiah, obviously, conquered death, restoring all creation, right? And the resurrection. But the unbelieving Jews considered it impossible for a man crucified as a criminal to be promised Messiah, right? So if you're a criminal, how could you be the Messiah? And this difference created a rift between Christians and non-Christian Jews that continues even to this day. And also, secondly, while the early church and the Jewish leaders agreed on the authority of the Hebrew Bible, they disagreed vigorously over the correct interpretation of the Bible or the Hebrew scriptures, particularly in regard to Jesus. So the early church believed that the hopes of the Hebrew scriptures for the coming Messiah were fulfilled in Jesus, but of course, unbelieving Jews denied this understanding, and there were many parties within Judaism that held to a wide range of views, but most of them found it impossible to accept that Jesus fulfilled the messianic hopes of the Old Testament, right? And in third reasoning why there's such a big rift between the three, the early church and the Jewish people of the first century differed over how they viewed Gentiles, right? For the most part, observant Jews did not share company with Gentiles, but on the other hand, many uncircumcised Gentiles were so attracted to the beliefs and ethical teaching of Judaism that they attached themselves to local Jewish synagogues and were known as God-fearers. So these Gentiles, called the God-fearers, were respected above other Gentiles, but they were not full members of the Jewish community. And these Gentile proselytes converted to Judaism, but this involved undergoing initiation rites, including baptism, circumcision, and the observance of the Jewish traditions. Now, while the early Jewish Christians began with this same understanding of Gentiles, they gradually came to understand that Gentiles who followed Christ were to be granted full status in the Christian church. So in light of new revelation from the Holy Spirit, the early church determined that faith in Christ expressed in confession and baptism was sufficient for membership in the Christian church. So this is why there's a big rift. The third rift is the apostles made it their practice to proclaim the gospel of Christ's universal lordship to both Jews and Gentiles, accepting the gifts and ministry of both peoples as the church grew. And they understood that God was using the Gentiles too to fulfill the hope of the kingdom that he had extended to his people in the Old Testament. Right? But the unbelieving Jews who didn't believe in Christianity was completely the opposite. Right? So when you know some of the details about the time when Luke was writing his books, the audience whom he wrote to, social context, and the similarities and differences of Jews and Christians, you're gonna find it much easier. You're gonna be more prepared to appreciate the problems Luke addressed and understand his solutions and to apply them to what is happening today also. So, yeah, that is an extensive look into the book of Acts. And I hope it's something that you guys really, really enjoy. And it's something that you guys will help you guys out when it comes to you understanding the book much better. All right? So there it is, guys. That is the word study for today in the book of Acts written by Luke. All right? So let's get into today's song of choice. And we're going back to our normal scheduling. And I picked a song from George Harrison, one of the Beatles. And this song is called My Sweet Lord, written in 1970. And I hope you guys really enjoyed this. And of course, if people know the context of this song, it wasn't for Christianity and about Jesus, but as people who have faith, we could take the song and make it something that applies to us. So everyone, this is George Harrison with My Sweet Lord. And that was the song of choice for today. That's George Harrison, one of the members of the Beatles. And that was from his first solo album. And that song is My Sweet Lord. You can hear references from all different religions in there. He says Hallelujah. He says My Sweet Lord. He says Hare Krishna, Dalai Lama. So it looks like a bunch of different religions are in that song too. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. And it's something that, we're beginning our regular scheduling once again. All right. So let's get into the last segment for today. And of course, every Wednesday is Health is Happiness. Last week, we heard from Dr. Zini on anxiety. And this week, we're going to hear from Dr. Abe. And he's going to be speaking about heart disease. And very, very grateful and thankful, Julius, for organizing this, as we're getting real doctors coming in and talking about different health matters coming from a very professional perspective. So everyone, please welcome today as we have Health is Happiness. And today is Dr. Abe from Australia with talking about heart disease.
Hi everyone, Abe here, doctor in Melbourne in Australia. Welcome to episode 28 and welcome back to our organ series where we will cover each major organ in the body, their functions, some of their diseases and how to look after them. Last time, a few weeks back, we covered the kidneys. Join me in today where we speak about the heart. The heart sits towards the left side of the chest. It is a fist-shaped organ with 4 chambers, 2 on the right and 2 on the left. Blood from all around the body drains into the right side of the heart first. From here, our blood is pumped into our lungs where it becomes oxygenated. The blood then flows into the left side of the heart and is pumped to the rest of the body. In terms of how to monitor the heart via bloods and scans, we have a few different ways to do this. We can investigate your heart through a range of blood tests, but we can also use electrical testing of the heart and also imaging of the heart. In terms of the blood tests, there is one specialized test known as troponin. Now, troponin is a protein found in heart muscle cells. When there is death or injury of the heart muscle, the dead heart cells release troponin into the bloodstream, and this rise in level is detected, and therefore it is an indicator, if it is elevated, that there has been some sort of injury to the heart. In terms of electrical testing, you may have seen in movies or even had one yourself, when a clinician will put 10 different stickers all over your chest and a couple on the arms and legs. What this test is an ECG, also known as electrocardiography. It's a fancy term, but it's a greatly valuable tool, and we use it to record the electrical signals of the heart. We can then interpret the readings to see if you're having a heart attack or if there are any other funny heart rhythms that your heart might be experiencing. In terms of imaging, we have a few different ways. The first is known as a TTE, or a transthoracic echocardiogram. Once again, we love our fancy terms, but all of this is essentially an ultrasound scan of the heart. We place a scanner over the chest wall towards the left side, and it gives us a really good global picture of how the heart is working in real time. We can look at things like how the heart is pumping. We can see if areas aren't pumping as strongly. We can also look at the heart valves, of which there are 4, and we can see if they're opening and closing appropriately. The other thing is we can also see if there's fluid surrounding the heart, which often happens when there's inflammation of the heart. After this, there are some really specialized tests to image the heart that we can use. One very common one is known as a coronary angiogram. We use this primarily when patients are having heart attacks, and the role of it is to look for any blockages in blood vessels which supply the heart. If a blood vessel becomes blocked, this means that the heart no longer receives oxygen, and eventually, without oxygen, the heart muscles start to die, hence the term heart attack. We'll explore this a little bit more in our pathology series, where I'll explain common diseases like heart attacks, strokes, cancers, and so on. So stay tuned for that in the coming weeks. Okay, now so let's move on to who is at risk of heart disease. Because the heart is so central in many things, a lot of things can affect its function. Therefore, those with high blood pressure, those with high cholesterol, those who have diabetes, those who smoke, those who drink excess amounts of alcohol, those who are obese or lack exercise weekly, or those who have chronic kidney disease, as we spoke about last time. all of these different individual type groups are at risk. Moving on, in terms of the different types of heart disease, unfortunately, there is an awful lot. You can have a heart attack, like we mentioned earlier. The heart can go into failure, where it stops pumping blood around the body effectively. You can have floppy, or conversely, narrowed heart valves, and that will affect the dynamics of the blood flowing between the four chambers of the heart. The heart can also, unfortunately, go into unusual rhythms. So, normally the heart is very ordered and rhythmic. If you've ever heard the heart on a recording or via stethoscope, it's very centralized, like lub-dub, like that. It pumps in and out regularly 60 times a minute. And all of this is related to the electrical signals, and that's why we do that sticker test or that ECG that we spoke about earlier. But in heart disease, a few things can happen. The heart can beat too fast, up to 200 times a minute, or it can even beat too slow, for example, at 20 beats a minute. In both cases, this is disastrous and needs to be corrected. So there are a lot of ways that the heart can be diseased. In terms of what symptoms someone might have, they include primarily chest pain. In general, any type of chest pain is not normal. If you do ever experience it, it's best to see a doctor. Other symptoms of heart disease include sudden loss of consciousness. If you suddenly collapse, it might well be related to your heart. Other symptoms include palpitations or a fluttering sensation in your chest, and that might indicate an irregular heart rhythm. Finally, shortness of breath. And although breathing is related to the lungs are inherently related to heart function. After all, the blood has to go via the heart to the lungs. So shortness of breath may well relate to heart disease as much as it may relate to lung disease. And we'll explore a little bit more about the lungs in next week's talk. To end, how can we look after your heart health? Well, as most things in medicine are, it's all about prevention, and that means being mindful of the risk factors. And so I'd say to recommend to control your blood pressure, control your cholesterol, and that can be done by eating a healthy, well-balanced diet that Julius has spoken about in earlier weeks. Stop smoking and reduce your alcohol intake. Finally, and perhaps very importantly, exercise. I would recommend 2 to 5 hours of moderate intensity exercise per week. And by moderate, I mean by the end of your session, you should be short of breath. All right then, well, thank you very much for joining me again on this episode. I hope you learned a few things about your heart today. Leave your comments and questions below, and we'll talk more next week.
And thank you so much, Dr. Abe from Australia, with a wonderful episode on heart disease and helping us to make sure that our hearts are protected. It reminds me literally of the Bible verse, guard your heart for it's the wellspring of life. And of course, biblically, it's talking both physically and spiritually too. So everyone, let's make sure that we are all healthy, control our blood pressure, and do things the right way. Eat well too. Everyone, if you have any questions for any of the doctors, it could be any question that's not even related to today's topic, go ahead, put it in the comments below. We would love to have these professional doctors giving you advice for any of the things that you're going through right now. All right. So there it is, guys. That is the end of today's Wednesday podcast. Everyone have an amazing and awesome day. Have an amazing service tonight, and we'll see you guys again tomorrow on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone,